When Ontario Premier Doug Ford met with Prime Minister Justin Trudeau last week, some expected sparks to fly, especially since Trudeau didn't exactly have kind things to say about the Premier throughout the election campaign. But the two held a surprisingly congenial meeting, with the Premier of Ontario calling for calm and national unity, a contrast to Trudeau's meetings with Western premiers. Let's get a sense of what's changed with Ontario Premier Doug Ford. He joins us from his offices in Toronto. Premier Ford, very nice to see you. You've criticized Trudeau in the past and were part of the carbon tax resistance. Do you now see yourself as a possible East-West unifier?
Well, first of all, thanks for having me on, Joyce. And I don't know if I'd call myself a unifier, but I'll tell you, I'm going to do the best I can to cool the waters, as they say. I have a great relationship with all the premiers right across this province, and I look forward to seeing the premiers here in Toronto on December the 2nd, and we'll be able to have a good conversation with them.
So, how do you lower that temperature? Because you really want to do that. Give us an example of what you could do.
Well, as I mentioned to the Prime Minister, it's absolutely essential. He listens to the people out west. I was out west at the Confederation meeting with Scott Moe. I visited the people in Alberta. And I can tell you, Joyce, anyone that's been out there, it's real. You go downtown in Calgary and you see a lot of vacant, empty buildings there. They need to be listened to. We're going to sit down with the rest of the premiers and discuss a few issues. But I think we have to send the world the message of certainty. Nothing scares businesses and economic development away from regions or countries than a country not being stable, being divided. We're Canada. We're a united country, and that's what I'm going to be making sure I say loud and clear to the rest of the premiers. As much as we may have differences within province to province, we have to send a united message out to the rest of the world.
So we know what one of Alberta Premier Jason Kenney's asks is. He's calling for a change in the equalization formula. Do you personally want it changed? Would that be good for your province?
Well, again, I will sit down and talk to all the premiers, including Premier Kenney. I understand what he's saying. He's transferring $20 billion over the federal government, and he has concerns, and the rest of the premiers have to listen to his concerns. So we're going to sit down as a group, and it's going to be a positive meeting. We're going to talk about other things other than equalization. We'll talk about healthcare, economic development, and jobs. So there's a few items on the table right now.
So this December 2nd meeting, the premiers obviously are coming to Toronto, as you said. Will you talk about, for instance, another issue, the Western premier's hope of a pipeline going east, maybe even through Ontario? Would you be online with that? Would you be down with that?
Well, I don't know if that's going to be the top of the conversation, but I've always been in favor of pipeline going through Ontario. Joyce, we have one of the largest, we do have the largest refinery in the country out in New Brunswick, and we're bringing in approximately about 400,000 barrels of oil from sometimes countries that disagree with us. And why not use our own energy? And there's many years of energy sitting in Alberta. But I think we have to talk about things that we can move the country forward. And I'm sure that's going to be one of their issues. Other issues that affect the whole country is infrastructure, economic development, and jobs, and obviously healthcare as well.
So the equalization, formula, you don't think will be on the agenda? The pipeline maybe going through Ontario won't go, but you won't be dealt with either. But you mentioned when you came out of your meeting with the Prime Minister, you called for national unity, saying the world is watching us fight, and that makes foreign investors flee. Do you fear that they're fleeing? Do you see that? Do you feel that in Ontario?
Well, Ontario, we're absolutely booming here because of our policies that we've implemented. We're leading North America in job creation and economic development. In the last year and 4 months, Joyce, Our government has created the environment for 252,400 jobs. That's 252,000 more families working, putting food on their tables, paying their mortgages, paying their rents. I think economics is very easy. You know, you cut the red tape, you cut the regulations, and put money back into people's pockets, and they're going to go out and they're going to spend it in places that they might otherwise not be able to spend it on when they don't have a job. So we're going to really focus on the economic development side of things, because I always say what is good for Ontario is good for Canada, and what's good for Canada is good for Ontario. And we'll be happy to lead the way when it comes to economic development, which we're doing right. We're leading North America in job creation, but we still have a lot more to do here in Ontario.
So Intergovernmental Affairs Minister Chrystia Freeland is in Edmonton. She's meeting with Jason Kenney. She'll meet with Scott Moe tomorrow. Do you think the Alberta Premier needs to follow your example and soften the rhetoric a little bit?
Well, you're going to have to ask Premier Kenney that. He has some real serious issues out west, and I know I had a conversation with Premier Moe this morning as well, getting ready, ramping up for this meeting, and we're very like-minded in a lot of issues. Some issues are specifically geared for the West, and I understand that. But the most important thing that we can do as premiers and what the Prime Minister can do is listen to their concerns. And I'm sure that's why the Prime Minister is sending the Minister out there to sit down and talk to him. And the Minister's from Alberta. So let's see how the conversation goes. And we'll be very, very positive at the Premier's meeting. But it's so important that the Premiers out west that have a tremendous amount of concerns understand and know that we're listening to them. And we're going to do everything we can to help the people out west.
We don't have a lot of time left, but I want to ask you this. You were generally absent from the election campaign, and the federal Conservative Party didn't do very well in large parts of Ontario ridings, actually, that you won. So do you think, in retrospect, they needed you?
Well, you know something, I said right from the get-go to Mr. Scheer, I wasn't getting involved, and somehow that got twisted around with the media that they didn't want me. Joyce, I have a huge job here in Ontario. I inherited a $15 billion deficit, the largest sub-sovereign debt in the entire world at the $347 billion. And so I have a full-time job going 18 hours a day, making sure we turn this province around, and we're making tremendous strides in doing that, and making us a very competitive area to open up businesses. And we've seen that. And since we've done that, new revenues of over $1 billion have come up to the provincial coffers on corporate taxes, $400 million on personal taxes, because more people are working, more companies are finding Ontario as their new headquarters, as a new home. And I encourage anyone out there that's listening, come to Ontario. We have the smartest and brightest people in the entire world right here. And what a great lifestyle they'll have when they get to Ontario. Our biggest problem, Joyce, right now, we have more jobs than we have people. That came up in a conversation with the Prime Minister. We receive about 6,600 economic development immigrants a year. I need more people. So anyone who doesn't have a job in Canada, come to Ontario. We need you, skilled or unskilled. If you're unskilled, we'll train you.
Absent for 6 weeks during the campaign, but here with us today. Thank you so much, Premier Ford.
Thanks so much for having me on, Joyce.